It's getting warmer and warmer when moose hunting, and to make sure you get the best quality venison, you must not waste any time. It is essential to eviscerate and cut up the moose into quarters as quickly as possible to make it cool down and not to waste the meat. You will need a very sharp knife, a rib cage spreader, a reciprocating saw with a wood blade, some nylon tie wraps, ropes or straps, nitrile gloves, stamen, also called cheesecloth, a clean tarp, and a couple of 2x3s to help transport the quarters. To obtain top quality venison, you must first expel the blood from the muscles by pumping each leg a dozen times. The blood will drain through the wound and it will prevent muscles from heating up. To facilitate the evisceration, put the animal on its back and then attach at least 2 of its legs with straps or ropes to keep it in balance. Then cut out the skin while bypassing the anus. Once the rectum has been set free, make sure to seal it tightly with a nylon tie wrap to prevent fecal matters from coming out and contaminating the meat. Then use a knife starting from the sternum and remove the skin by going around the abdomen while avoiding piercing the flank. This way of doing it will allow you to better clear the guts and facilitate the evisceration of the animal. You may now continue to cut by removing the udders of a female or the genital parts of the male up to the opening practiced around the anus and taking care not to cut the urethra. Cut between the 2 muscles to the bone and make sure that the rectum is cleared. Follow by removing the muscles of the abdomen that cover the guts. Then cut the skin from the thorax to the base of the neck if you want to mount the head. If you prefer to keep the maximum amount of meat, continue the cutting by clearing the esophagus and trachea and then cut them as close as possible to the throat. Now make sure you cut all the tissues that hold the esophagus and trachea to the carcass. Then push the organs inside the rib cage. Now, saw the sternum to clear the organs. The use of a reciprocating saw will greatly facilitate the task. It is now recommended to use a rib cage spreader to help you open the chest of the moose. The next step is to cut the diaphragm that separates the heart and the lungs from the rest of the organs. Pay special attention not to pierce the stomach, intestines, or bladder. The contents of these organs could contaminate your meat. Cut the tissues that attach the bowels to the carcass and pull the esophagus to remove these organs from the rib cage. Now, saw through the pelvis bone and remove any tissues that hold the rectum in place to remove the viscera. Then turn the animal over to drain the blood. You must now cut the animal into quarters. Cut the meat between the second and third last rib with a knife, taking care not to cut through the skin right away, so to keep the meat clean. Then saw the bone structure and spine, making sure that the saw blade does not touch the ground, bringing back earth, wood, or other impurities. Cut the skin at the very end to protect the meat. It is preferable to use a knife rather than the saw to finalize the cutting of the muscles and skin. Now divide the back into two by cutting into the center of the spine, and always take care that the saw blade does not touch the ground. Then cut the skin to release both hindquarters. It is now time to cut the head at the end of the spine to keep the maximum amount of meat. Then divide the front part of the animal by sawing in the center of the spine, and keep avoiding cutting through the skin. Then cut the skin as to separate the front part of the animal into two quarters. Now cut the skin off the legs near the joint with a knife. Then slice them off with a saw. If you wish, you can keep the tongue by cutting along the jaw and also the heart that is located near the lungs, since they are both edible. To carry the hindquarters, it is recommended to make an incision between the tendon and the bone of the legs, so you can pass through a clean piece of wood. The quarters are thus easier to transport. For the front quarters, make an incision between the second and third last rib of the quarter to pass through a clean piece of wood. You must now cool the meat as quickly as possible. Suspend the quarters and remove the skin. Exposed meat without the skin in the open air cools faster. The thick layer of moose skin and hair is a very good insulator and could prevent the carcass from cooling fast enough to preserve the meat, even if the ambient temperature is close to freezing. Remove all tissues that are bruised or engorged with blood. If you hunt with a rifle, remove all the meat that is within a radius of 10 centimeters around the point of impact to avoid consuming contaminated meat from the lead of the projectile. Now, in order not to soil the exposed meat, you must protect the quarters with at least one layer of cheesecloth. This protection also avoids the possibility of flies contaminating the meat by laying eggs. If you do not have a cold room to cool the meat, shorten your trip and leave preferably early in the morning or late afternoon, as the temperature is normally cooler then. The meat must be kept between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, between 12 and 24 hours later, you could waste all of your meat. If the ambient temperature is higher, you must immediately leave and register your animal, and then store it in a cold room. Always carry the quarters sheltered from the sun, using means of transportation that is clean and well ventilated. It is also recommended to place the meat on wooden pieces to help air circulation. When registering, in the case of a moose cut into quarters, you must also present the entire head or the complete lower jaw and, if it is a male, the antlers attached to the skull or part thereof. The quickness with which you get your meat cooled determines in large part the quality of your venison and avoids wasting game. After the shooting, you must not waste any time. The meat should be cooled quickly. Good hunting!